Hi, HR Nation, it's Chris Rainey. Welcome to HR Leaders, the show where we interview today's most successful and innovative HR practitioners 5 days a week. Today, we have a special guest on the show. We're joined by Amanda Rollins, Marketing Evangelist at 360 Learning. Amanda, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi, Chris. I'm doing great. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. Thank you very much for joining us. Excited to have you on the show. Amanda, give our listeners a little bit of information tell them a little bit about yourself personally and your journey to where we are today.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, I'm excited to be here. As you said, I'm the marketing evangelist for 360 Learning. I'm actually American, spent most of my career working in HR technology at some SaaS companies, made the transition to move over to France, and now I'm here at 360 Learning, helping them with their marketing as they penetrate the US and UK markets.
Amazing. So they managed to get you all the way over from the US.
Yeah,
to France.
they did. They had to give me a good offer because Paris, it's
It's like London. It's like London. Anyone who's moving over to London, it's not the most cheapest of cities, are they?
No,
So must be quite big of a culture shift.
It is. It's a huge culture shift, but I actually love it better here. Things are more relaxed. People appreciate food more, and it's more calm, and there's a lot of wine, so it's wonderful.
Fantastic. Well, tell us a bit more about your role at 360 Learning.
Yeah. So my main focus is really content. Anything as far as spreading the message about what 360 Learning does. Writing a lot of ebooks, writing a lot of articles. Most recently, I did a lot of work trying to understand the science behind learning, which is what we're going to talk about today. So really trying to keep it high level and figure out what the world needs in order to have learning be a way of life.
Well, it's great. I'm really happy to have you on the show because for everyone listening right now, it's a challenge for everyone in their roles, in their organizations, whether they're a HR leader or just a leader in general. This is something which is definitely top of mind. So I'm really happy to have you on here. So let's jump in then. How does human interaction increase learner success?
Sure. So that's kind of our motto here at 360 Learning is that the key to learning is going to come from human interaction. But that can mean a lot of different things, especially when you're talking about digital learning, right? Because human interaction kind of gives off this idea that it might have to physically be in person. So when we say that, what we really mean is any sort of activity where a learner is interacting with another person within learning. And that can be with a fellow student or with the trainer or with someone else in the department. But we've done a lot of research to find out how that comes to fruition. And it's proven scientifically that human interaction has to be present in order for learning to take place.
What are some of the things you're doing with the platform to achieve that then?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to do it. One of the first ones is going to be active learning. So obviously, you've probably heard your whole life that active learning is better than passive learning. But a lot of people, I'm not sure if they're applying that in the way that they do their learning programs now. But active learning is something that we hear a lot about, but we don't see a lot of it. So active learning is when the learner's actively participating as he learns the information. It's going to be the opposite of what you might see in traditional learning, like a lot of PowerPoint presentations or a lot of lecturing or things where the student's really just kind of on the receiving end. That's the opposite of that is active learning. So things where as the student is learning, he has opportunities to apply it, possibly before he's even learned it. That's been proven to lead to higher engagement rates and to higher learning rates. So for example, within the platform, you can implement things like discussions, questions, peer-to-peer feedback. It's a great way to include active learning in the platform.
That's one of the things that when I first started working with you guys, I love the fact that you have the social learning and the social engagement. Because we see it all the time. There's so many platforms out there, right, where you've got an incredible player and you got a great system, but what's lacking is actually the human interaction, like you said, being able to communicate with the other people who are taking the course, the social learning element's always been missing. And I think that's why, for example, platforms like LinkedIn are huge because you have a credible resource of content, but then you also have that social element where you can network with people, make new connections along the way. So there's no surprise that Facebook, LinkedIn are where they are right now, right? But for some reason, we're not bringing that into the workplace.
Right, exactly. And you touch on a great point, actually. There was this thing, I'm not familiar with it, but it was called Web 2.0, and it was kind of like the revolution of the web. And the thing about Web 2.0 is exactly what you described. It's the social aspect. It's user-generated content. It's interaction. It's openness. So things like Reddit or LinkedIn or Facebook, all of that is completely open for anyone to go in. They can create content. They can comment on it, and they interact. And you see the engagement rates on those websites are some of the highest in the world. Compared to kind of the web 1.0, or the old way of doing things. It was really proprietary. Only the people who own it can make the content. No commenting, no interaction, and it makes sense that there's probably not a lot of traffic going on there. So it's kind of the same thing when it comes to learning. You want to implement social, but you want to do it the right way, because we've seen some players out there who they'll implement social, but it's not in the course. So you'll have the learning courses, and then maybe on the homepage there's like a news feed, which is almost doing it, but not really, because for that learning to happen, you need to have that interaction right in the course. So something that we've done at 360 Learning is when you're right in the middle of a course, you're in the middle of learning something, you can comment on the side and ask a question about exactly what you're working on, or, comment on what someone else said, or post a question. And that interaction makes your learning process become active inherently.
Mm-hmm. So you'd actually then engage in the learning.
Yeah.
Because not only are you learning, but you're also interacting with the other people that are on that journey with you. So you're much more inclined to go back and continue learning, to stay on longer. Because I think the engagement piece is where people we hearing the engagement in learning is like a crisis right now for many organizations. In terms of human interaction to increase learner success, what are the other things that you've come across?
So there's a lot of different ways to do it. One of them is, beyond the interactions happening within the learning platform, asking questions has been proven to be one of the best ways to get to get a successful transfer of knowledge. And it's really interesting. There's two reasons why. When you ask questions, the teacher actually becomes more engaged. And we have a study on that I'll touch on in a bit. But as the student asks, as the trainer asks questions of the learners, they themselves are more engaged in the content, which allows them to become better trainers. But then the student is forced to justify their answer. It's kind of a play on the Socratic method. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but Socrates, the Greek philosopher, he was really well known for doing this. He was kind of got a bit of a bad rap for it, actually. When he was trying to teach somebody something, he would just continually ask them why, or how did you get there, over and over again, which of course can become frustrating if you're doing it for too long, but forces the students to have to poke holes in their own logic and then become really sure in their answer. And through that process, they're more likely to remember it at the end. So asking questions like that in the middle of the learning, like I said, possibly even before it's learned, not like as a quiz at the end, but while it's actually being learned, that's going to help them, have a more strong memory of the content that you're trying to teach to them.
Because I think a lot of times we have the solutions ourselves, right?
Right.
But it takes someone asking that question for you to then come up with the answer yourself. Because a lot of times people just need permission to do that. And as you said, if you ask a question, you're forced to actually think more deeply about it and then come up with an answer. And that's what consultants have been doing for since the dawn of time. If you ever have a conversation with a consultant, it's ingrained in them. They can't help but go, what would you do about it, Chris? How would you approach that? And all of a sudden they just spin the conversation completely back on you, and you know how I have to take ownership of it as well. Yeah. So you mentioned there's another area as well that you was focusing on.
Oh yeah. So another one is, it's going to be encouragement.
Okay.
Now this one's really interesting because it really plays on the human condition of wanting to feel important, wanting to feel special. And this one, it pulls a little bit of what works about asking questions in the same area. And what that is you're kind of giving someone a platform to figure it out as they go. And what you said before is really, you hit the nail right on the head. We have our own resources. We can kind of figure it out on our own. It's just often we're not really given the chances to do that. But so in one of the studies that we're going to talk about, there are people whose their only role was to support and encourage the learners. They didn't have any knowledge on the subject. They had no idea what they were talking about. Their only role was, oh, tell me more about that. That's so interesting. Or how did you figure that out? Not really in a probing way, but more like a good job. You must be so smart. Keep telling me. When you do that, yeah, it's so silly, but when you do it, it really works for a couple of reasons. First, the learner is going to feel a self-confidence. They're going to feel smart. So they're going to have that feel good feeling. That's going to make them want to continue going, give them a little bit of confidence in their answer. And secondly, then they become emotionally attached to the answer. So that's going to help the memory last with them longer, if they're feeling good about what they're doing. In some of the studies that we saw when encouragement was in place, some of the students would then start teaching each other, like mini trainers popped up within the group, which was really amazing. So when you give someone the opportunity to shine, they're going to be more likely to remember the material, and they're going to be more likely to spend more time trying to find the right answer.
Yeah, because they're hearing themselves say it, and I'm sure it releases a lot of endorphins and the feel-good factor, that they're the ones actually, and then naturally they're going to want to share that with everyone else, right?
Right.
I use a similar sort of methodology in sales as well for our teams, to ask our clients these questions and ask them the open questions, and ask them whenever they have a challenge, the first question, like, what are you currently doing about what's that can affect you? And it has the same effect as well. So I think it's really important. So how we're talking about how the brains are hardwired as well. How are our brains hardwired to learn through human interaction? This is a big part of it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's really interesting. I loved doing the research that I got to do for this series that we're doing, because it got to look at the cognitive brain science behind learning. And I think that's just fascinating, figuring out how the human mind actually learns. Because once you figure that out, then you can kind of shape your strategy from there. And that's what we're all trying to do with the learning engagement crisis that you've mentioned. I mean, we're all feeling it. So I thought this was really interesting. And we found a couple of really cool findings. So the first, there's something called mirror neurons. Have you heard of mirror neurons?
I have, but I'm not going to give you the definition of it.
Okay. Thank you. So mirror neurons are these neurons that live in your brain, and they're super interesting. What they do is they fire when they're watching a person complete a task or do an activity, and they fire as if they themselves were completing the task. So this study, it came about, there were some researchers a couple of years, or several years back, they were studying monkeys, and they put these electroprobes in the brains of the monkeys, and they had the monkeys do various motor skills like picking up a cup or reaching for something. And every time the monkey would pick up the cup, the neurons would fire. Okay, cup, fire, touch something, fire, as it should be. But on one of the days that they were doing their research, they found one monkey would pick up a cup, and the neurons would fire in another monkey watching that monkey. Or a person would pick up the cup, and the monkey would fire the neurons as if he was doing it. And this led to the discovery of the mirror neuron network, which it's exactly what it sounds like. The neurons literally mirror the action that it's watching. And this is really interesting because it shows that from a really young age, humans learn by observing and mimicking. And when you think about it, this makes sense. Like, for example, if you've ever been around a baby, which you of course have been, if a baby is on if you're near a baby and you stick your tongue out, for example, it doesn't take long for the baby to stick her tongue out back at you, or you can wave at a baby and it will wave back at you. That's, that comes down to how we're hardwired to learn from day one. We observe and then we replicate. And it goes on further. One of the people who kind of analyzed this study, he believed that this is what led to human evolution as a whole, simply because things that would happen, way back in the BC era, someone would discover something like, for example, a good way to pick berries or a good way to make fire. Instead of that discovery burning out, other people would witness it and replicate it. And it's one of the things that he says is responsible for, human evolution today. So it's really interesting because when you get to the root of how humans learn and you think that it's by replication, well, how does replication happen? You need to have human interaction. You have to have somebody to watch. Those neurons aren't going to fire if you're just by yourself. And it's really interesting because it can be applied to learning today in a lot of different ways. For example, if you're learning a learning course and you see somebody asking a question within the platform, then you're going to think, okay, well, I'm going to ask a question next. Or you see someone applying it on the job, you're going to say, okay, well, you don't even really have to say it. Your brain's going to pick up on it and be able to replicate it and help you remember how to do that task. So it really proves that learning is so much more achievable when you're physically with other people and able to witness them and replicate what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. So you guys are basically taking that on that premise of 360 learning and creating as many interactions as possible in the platform where you can demonstrate this.
Right, exactly.
It all makes so much sense, and it's actually a lot more simple, right, than we think it is,
right.
As well. And just being able to actually step back and see that and replicate that in our organizations, both digital learning, but also learning in the office and just in the environment in general, I think is very important. What are the recent studies saying? What are they revealing then around the future of learning? We hear it all the time as a buzzword. I hear it from everyone. What was it? What was the research? What came back?
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll tell you about one of the studies. It's probably the most famous of the ones that I have here. It's the Granny Cloud studies. And this was by an educational researcher, Sugata Mitra. He's kind of like the pioneer for modern day educational research. And it's his studies that I think have the most impact on what learning is going to become, the future of learning. So he's a really cool guy. He's a humanitarian in a way, and he believes that education can happen anywhere, learning can happen anywhere. And so what got him started was there's all these parts of the world that don't have resources, they don't have teachers, right? And everyone was freaking out, thinking, oh, these children aren't going to learn. If we don't get these teachers, it's impossible. And he kind of thought, that's not true. He thought learning can happen without the place of teachers. I think it's possible. So he wanted to conduct a series of experiments. His first one, he calls it the hole in the wall experiment. He went to a rural village in India, went and put a computer, just put it like in the side of a wall, really, literally a hole in the wall, put a computer, had internet access, English computer in an Indian village, and just left it there. Didn't put any instructions, literally it's on, it's gone. He left for 2 weeks. He came back, and within 2 weeks, these children, ages between 6 to 12, when he came back, they had learned in English how to go on the internet, how to play games, how to record themselves singing. They were sending emails, all of this in a computer that they've never seen before, in a language that they don't speak. So that was kind of his first like aha moment, like, okay, learning can happen kind of anywhere. From there, he took it a bit further, and he wanted to see if these students could teach themselves really complex topics. Again, not in the language that they speak. One of his experiments, he left the children with the computer, and he said, I want you to try to understand biology. I want you to understand DNA. It's probably going to be very difficult. I don't understand any of the stuff on here. Good luck. That's how he left it. He was like, I don't know, good luck. Yeah. So what he did is he had this test, and he gave them a test on the topics before he went, and they obviously got a 0. And then he left them for a month with the computer, and he said, good luck, guys. Best of luck. Came back 30 days later, gave them an exam, and they had 30%, which even increasing to a 30% given the circumstances is kind of an impossibility, but it was pretty exciting. So this is where it gets interesting. These kids are teaching themselves a bit, but it's just them, just the kids. They have a person in the village, a bit of an older person. She's probably in her 20s. And he says to her, I need you to help me out. Can you just support these kids? Can you just be a cheerleader for them? And she said, I don't know anything about biology. And he said, that's okay. You don't have to. All you have to do is play the role of the grandmother. And she says, what do you mean the role of the grandmother? And he says, just say, oh, that's so great. Tell me more. Just like a grandmother would. Be so impressed with everything that they do. So he says, I need you to do this. And she says, okay. He comes back again 30 days later. All she was doing was simply encouraging them. She has no idea about the subject or any of the expertise. And their scores had increased to a 70% on DNA, structure, and microbiology. These students who are young kids who don't even speak English, they taught themselves biology simply with the encouragement of this person.
That's pretty incredible. And it's incredible, but at the same time, I'm not surprised, because I feel like we underestimate, a lot of people ask me, Chris, how did you learn how to build your website? Or how did you learn how to do your podcast and use the editing software? I just picked up, you typed in Google,
right.
Or how to create a podcast, how to build a website, and then you learn, right? And you jump into it.
It was really interesting. And this is where I think it's going to have a huge impact on the future of learning, is that learning managers, trainers, they need to take a new role. And that's going to be, right now, they're kind of administrators, and they're putting together the courses, administering it. They're not super hands-on. And unfortunately right now, a lot of them need to have an expertise in learning necessarily. This kind of proves that you need to be more of a community leader. You need to be more of that coach. All you have to do, you don't even have to necessarily know the subject material. You just get in there with them, and this can go from digital learning to even like classic education. Just encourage the students, ask them questions, and sit there and be a cheerleader for them like a grandma. And learning is going to happen on its own. I mean, it's kind of the human condition. Where there's a will, there's going to be learning. It's kind of how we've evolved. So it's really interesting, this new role that's, in my opinion, going to be more exciting for learning managers, as opposed to being, in the administrative seat. They get to now be a community leader, and they're literally just going to be managing a community of learners with active questions, high engagement, and it should come so much easier now if you adopt this type of method.
Mm-hmm. I think it's very important, because obviously, as you know, our listeners are chief learning officers, chief HR officers from the world's leading global brands. And I think they're the people that can have the biggest impact on this
Yeah,
in their
exactly.
organizations. Yeah, very interesting. It's not something that's been brought up on the show before, and it's very interesting. And also it's something very actionable for our leaders to do straight away. It doesn't cost millions of pounds to implement what you're talking about, but the impact and the output that can come from that is huge for businesses. So knowing what you've known and based on the research, how are you then using that within the 360 learning platform then and to help your clients?
Yeah, so it all comes back to those interactions that happen right within the platform. So something that we like to do here, internally with ourselves is ask questions right in the middle of a learning course. Something where the student has the opportunity to either give their opinion, which kind of gives that encouragement, that brainy cloud vibe where you get to talk about what you just learned or kind of sum it up, where you feel proud about what you just did, or opportunities to give feedback within it, which I think anytime anyone has the opportunity to give feedback, they usually do because they feel good about it. They feel like what they're saying has value, and then they hold on to that harder. And again, just interacting with other people on the team, giving opportunities for people to really communicate with each other, and not in like that false corporate way, like, I need you to comment on this to get a pass, or, like what someone said, but more you see your colleagues have an actual insightful question, you feel encouraged to then comment on that or ask your own insightful question, and you're kind of working through this together as you go. So anytime that we can put opportunities for human interactions within our courses, it's the first thing that we do, because we really do believe that that's the key to this whole learning concept.
Fantastic. That leads us quite nicely on to the next question, because with all of this, most organizations, they have obviously KPIs attached to their learning programs. And this is something which is up for debate in many businesses on what they should look like. What's the key to reaching learning KPIs in your opinion, based on what you're seeing from the clients that use your platform and the research?
Right. So it's really gonna come down to finding ways to engage your learners. When you look at your learning KPIs, a lot of times it's going to be, course completion, or percentage of course completed, how many logins they're doing on the courses, engagement on the courses, and the scores, the rates that they're getting on the tests that they have, or whatever it is as you pass. When you look at those, the key to reaching them is really going to be to create, obviously, material that's going to be interesting and engaging, but material that's going to be relevant to them, and it's going to be accessible to them. Accessibility is something that we really push a lot here, having the option to pick it up whenever, wherever. We have a mobile option with ours, just because if you're trying to push human interactions, but you have to log into your desktop every single time, that's going to make it more difficult, right? Whereas if you can get a notification on your phone that a colleague just commented on something that you commented on, and you're on your phone on the train home, you can pick it up and you can reply. That's really going to replicate that type of Facebook engagement that we want, right?
Mm-hmm. And the same for the podcast. So for me, I spend on the way to work, I'll watch and listen to videos and listen to podcasts. That's how I learn. On the way home, but if I didn't have that on my phone, in the app, then I wouldn't be able to do that, right? And I think that's the big difference. Companies have to move towards how people are consuming content outside of the workplace.
Yeah, exactly. And if you want this kind of concept of learning all the time everywhere to be adopted, then you can't have it live in just one area. We want it to we really push this concept of a learning organization. The difference between us and other ones out there is because we're a learning engagement platform. We don't want to be just an LMS or just a tool. We want it to really be the full embodiment of anything that your team needs to be up to date anytime, really. And so those sort of human interactions are going to happen. They have to happen naturally. And that's kind of the problem when it feels too corporate, or it feels kind of fake, like the kind of like cheesy corporate interactions that doesn't feel natural, and that's not going to be the experience that you want. You want it to feel like it just comes natural and you're able to access it anywhere. Yeah. So definitely the accessibility, and then any opportunity to have your learners speak up, participate. It can't be a one-sided thing. That's gonna be the biggest thing, is having them participate in the learning as they're going, and being able to give their opinions or have real interactions with other people.
Mm-hmm. You have to be where they are, right, as well, and match their user experience, that they're having outside of the organization. I think that's really, really important because, we all use WhatsApp, we use, LinkedIn, we use Facebook, Messenger, etc. So if you can create a platform that mimics the way that they consume content on YouTube and consume content within their social chats and bring that all together for their learning, they're going to use it.
Right.
They're going to use it. They're going to consume it. It makes sense. It feels normal. It feels natural. It feels like something they've always, one thing I love about your app is that when I first downloaded it, it felt like I'd already used it before because it felt like an app that I already had because it had my social feed. It had the list of the videos and the training sessions. You don't need to give someone a guide on how to do it. And I come across a lot of, especially as a sales director in previous roles, I had multiple platforms that we used to train our sales guys. And the fact that I would have to give someone a 2-day training on how to use the system, that already was a flag alone as well. And so what's some of the other ways within the app that the leaders that they're listening can measure? Because I think just because someone's taken the course and the program doesn't mean they necessarily consume the content.
Right.
So what are some of the metrics you have in there that it can measure?
There's a lot of ways you can do it. You can measure how long they're spending in the platform. So that's something that some of our clients do because it's one thing to complete a course, it's another thing to
exactly
log back in repeatedly or see how often they're staying in it. So that's something that we measure. We found that with our programs, we've had high rates of people coming back and spending a long time in it, or logging in multiple times a week within the first week, for example, at some clients. That's a really huge indicator of how engaging your content really is. I mean, there's a huge difference, right, between taking it the first time, doing it for 30 minutes just to get the check, versus logging in 27 times in a week and spending an average of 10 minutes each session. I mean, that's huge. And these are some of the numbers that we've seen with our clients. So we give you all those metrics to measure because it is going to come down to much more than just logging and doing the course. Because if it was about getting people to log in and doing the course, we already have that. That already exists. People already, check the boxes. But it's more about the time they're spending on it and how much they're engaging with the platform.
Engaging with other people, I think that's the metric that I love the most when I look at the platforms. You can see in there who's helping other people, who's replying to people's questions in there, who's liking and commenting and sharing. And naturally, you can see the people that are in there that are going to be your sort of star players, let's say, because they're engaging with the content, they're helping others. They have no reason to. They're not incentivized to, but they naturally want it. They have that, those leadership capabilities. That they want to help people in there. So that's one of the things that I like, that, if you have 100 people in on the course, you can see immediately who's engaging with other people the most through the statistics. I think that's one of the most important things that I would look at as an organization, to see who are the people engaging it, but also who are the people that are helping everyone else as well.
And there's that gamification where they're going to feel like they're like recognition in a way, even though there's no incentive, but you know that people can see that you're doing this and it feels good.
Yeah. And it does, scientifically, it does release dopamine in the body and give you that gratification. That's one of the reasons why people are addicted to social media, is every time they get that like, every time they get that comment, it releases a little bit more and they feel a bit more better about themselves. It really, so if you can do that and gamify it as well, then it's going to be incredible. So yeah, exactly. Fantastic. Well, look, thank you so much, man. You've definitely given our listeners some great advice. I'm excited to share this with them. Appreciate you coming and joining us on the show. Before we part ways, give our listeners, if there's one parting piece of guidance you can give to other leaders, what would that be? And also, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you personally if they have any questions?
Absolutely. Well, again, thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure to be on the show today. My imparting piece of advice to give to leaders listening would be not to ignore the importance of human interactions. That the science that's out there today, all the studies that we've read have found that human interaction is the key to learning. It's what drives transfer of knowledge and retention, and it's what's going to drive engagement if you want to reach your numbers. So don't shy away from human interaction. There's lots of easy ways to implement it into your learning strategy, and we have lots of ways we can help you out with that. And if you want to learn more about how you can do this, you can check out 360learning.com. We have lots of resources on there, everything from our case studies to our how-to guides on how to do this, as well as the ebook that's going to cover a lot of the scientific studies that I talked about today in much, much more detail. We just came out with that last week and we're really excited. So love to have you take a look at that as well.
Thank you again, Amanda. Guys, make sure you head over to hrleaders.com. There you'll find all of the show notes on episode, everything we're talking about. There'll be a link over there to 360 Learning. I would say, because I've done it myself, make sure you should definitely jump on the free trial, check it out yourselves, dive in, take a look. And also there'll be a link to the ebook that Amanda mentioned for you guys to download. So if you really want to understand more about the important scientific breakthroughs in learning, and you can discover how to apply them using this ebook. So definitely check that out as well. Well, Amanda, thank you again for taking the time to join us, and I wish you all the best until we next speak.
Thanks. You as well.